Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today, and all of it is brought to you by ExpressVPN. Take back your internet privacy today and find out how you can get ExpressVPN for 3 months for free. That's expressvpn.com/martini. A little bit more on them later in the podcast. And Jim, we've talked a lot about immigration and the increasing push from the far left, although maybe it's not so far on the left anymore, to abolish immigrations and customs enforcement. This all started with the primary victory of Ocasio-Cortez in New York's 14th District on Tuesday. Then we had Kirsten Gillibrand talking to Chris Cuomo and amazingly calling for it. Bill de Blasio's done it. Bernie Sanders has sort of dabbled in it. Kamala Harris, same thing. So this idea is gathering steam. We saw all these Reunite the Family rallies across the country this past weekend, and all sorts of signs at all these rallies about abolishing ICE with very little idea about what to do with it. Here's Elizabeth Warren speaking out in her dulcet tones at a rally this past weekend.
We need to rebuild our immigration system from top to bottom, starting by replacing ICE with something that reflects our morality.
With our morality, but I love just the phrase that we need to replace ICE with something. And that's pretty much as far as they've gotten so far, Jim, because there's a congressman from Wisconsin named Mark Pocan who wants to abolish ICE, but he wants to set up a commission to make sure that whatever replaces it does the job that it's supposedly supposed to do, which I guess in his estimation, as far as I read these stories, is only catch terrorists. But I'm not sure how we're supposed to do that if we're not stopping people from coming in. But anyway, this could have been an issue with a significant moral high ground, especially among independent voters and so forth, with the whole debate over the family separation. But now, of course, the Democrats pouring so much gasoline on the fire, this is potentially going to backfire on them in a major way.
Greg, there are just so many layers to this. I'll begin with perhaps a surprising one. I'm going to subject you to an unexpected pop quiz.
Okay.
Greg, what federal agency is separating the children from immigrants or migrants who are crossing the border and claiming asylum?
The Department of Health and Human Services.
Oh, very good, because I was going to say it's Customs and Border Patrol, was my understanding.
Okay.
So abolish ICE. That's not even the agency that's doing the stuff you don't like. But hey, fine, go for it, whatever. Details. Let me get this straight. You're calling for the abolition of the agency that is different from the one that's doing the thing that's really upsetting you so much, and you'll get back to us on what you want to replace it with. Guys, you really don't have a proposal here. You got a 3x5 index card. That's what you've got. You don't even need to go back to the drawing board. You haven't even gone near the drawing board. The drawing board is a really important step in this process of policymaking, because some of us have long memories and can remember we have to pass the bill so that you can see what's in it. No, we're not doing any of this stuff anymore. No, we got burned on that one once already. If you guys want to replace ICE, you better give us a very nice, specific, detailed plan of how you want to do this. And it's worth noting, like Democrats, the Washington Post is insisting some are falsely claiming that the Democrats want to abolish ICE entirely. Well, wait a second. When you're rallying, it's not abolish ICE and replace it with an federal agency that will enact the same mission, but will have different tack. That's a long chant. They can't remember all that much part. I'm open to the possibility that these guys want to replace it, and just merely that the real objection is not to the mission of ICE, but to the particular methods being used. And fine, we can have that debate. Obviously, there are a lot of people on left, right, and center who are kind of troubled with the concept of separating children from their parents while they're awaiting a hearing on their asylum claim. Having said that, it's worth noting there are some people who simply believe ICE should not exist. A couple of days ago, I was pointing to an article in The Nation that talked about how this was becoming a rallying cry. And they were objecting to, I think it was Josh Barrow, who had written, look, this is an unserious proposal until they come up with another agency or another, federal, government organization whose job would be to perform this task. And The Nation's argument was, no, it's not that we want a different agency to do this task. We don't want the task done. They do not want organizations raiding places, looking for illegal immigrants and sending them back. And maybe there are some Democrats who just want, to rename it. You can argue, they've never proposed this before 2003. Look, the duty of collecting people who have been or in the country illegally and sending them back has been a federal duty for generations. Now, we can argue about how it's being done or something like that. But I'd love to poll the people who are out there, who are at these rallies, and say, do you want a different federal agency or a new federal agency to handle these duties? Or do you want ICE abolished and do you want to simply stop deporting people? My guess is a lot of people would say stop deporting people. There is a philosophy on the left that once you get here, you're an American and you deserve the full rights of citizenship, right then and there. That basically getting here is all it really requires. That's, we've decided you're a good person because you got here. This doesn't work very well in a world full of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and MS-13 and various groups like that. It was late last week that Barack Obama said he said, Democrats need to return to the politics of hope in order to win future elections. I see this policy proposal, Greg, as hope, as in that we will hope that no one who's in the country illegally intends to harm us.
Right.
And hope for the best. Good luck, America.
So do we even screen them when they come in? Did we just simply ask them if you're ISIS or Al-Qaeda or some of these other terrorist groups? And if they say no, we let them in, no other screening necessary, or is that repressive in some way?
My suspicion, Greg, it's kind of like that off-campus bar that every campus seemed to have in college. Oh, you have a photo ID, and that okay, you look 81. Go ahead in, kiddo.
All right. Oh, the politics of hope. Well, the hope for a lot of Americans is to be able to be financially secure, of course, and sometimes they run into some difficult situations, and sometimes they need to take out some loans, but sometimes those loans are offered by people who don't necessarily have the best interest of folks at heart. So private equity lenders are in the headlines of the Washington Post, and this is potentially important because we're seeing headlines in the last few days that people are getting loans for mortgages with very little down again, Jim. So I can't imagine what could possibly go wrong with that. But this story has an interesting twist to it from the Washington Post. It says the check arrived out of the blue, issued in his name for $1,200, a mailing from a consumer finance company. Stephen Huggins eyed it carefully. A loan, it said. Smaller type said the interest rate would be 33%. Way too high, Huggins thought. He put it aside. A week later, his 2005 Chevy pickup was in the shop, and he didn't have enough to pay for the repairs. He needed the truck to get to work, to get the kids to school. So Huggins fished the check out that day in April 2017 and cashed it. Long story short, he ended up getting sued for over $3,000 because he took out another loan with these sharks. And, of course, they wanted a lot of interest. But here's the little twist that comes with this story. It came from an outfit called Mariner Finance, and it's owned and managed by an $11.2 billion private equity fund controlled by Warburg Pincus, a storied New York firm. The president of Warburg Pincus is Timothy F. Geithner, who, as Treasury Secretary in the Obama administration, condemned predatory lenders. In fact, it says later in the story, Geithner excoriated predatory lenders in their role in the Wall Street meltdown of 2007. So, Jim, it's amazing what happens from people and their talking points and what they'll actually do when they're making a whole lot of money here. What do you think of Tim Geithner being tied up in all this?
Greg, Tim Geithner is inadvertently one of the most fascinating figures in the modern Democratic Party. I don't say this because of his remarkable charisma or anything like that, although actually I do think it'd be kind of an interesting guy to sit down and chat with. No doubt he knows the financial world inside and out. Having said that, he was the guy who, Barack Obama takes office after the Wall Street crash of late 2008, the economic crisis. And Tim Geithner was very much a creature of the status quo. He had been in this world his entire career and steps in. And so there were some people in the Democratic world who were a little, wait a second, this is, the guy, he was kind of on duty when all of this stuff was going on. Why do we want somebody? Wouldn't we prefer some sort of more of an outsider figure? But they go with Geithner, and a lot of us will recall a little bump in the road to the confirmation of Secretary Geithner was that he had failed to pay all of his taxes. Now, if you recall the specifics, I believe it was that he had tried to deduct sending his kids to camp as a child care expense. You're not allowed to do that. Although I don't know about you, Greg. Here we are. It's mid-July. I just sent off the kids to camp today, and maybe we should make that a child care expense. Maybe Tim Geithner was just a visionary. I was going to say, Tim Geithner, I feel your pain. But having said that, look, this was a blip. Republicans grumbled about it. Not a single Democrat made any issue of this. I believe he was being questioned by Charlie Rangel who also had failed to pay taxes. So I kind of use these guys as poster boys for the progressive aristocracy, that once you achieve a certain rank in our society, the rules don't really apply to you the same way they would to lesser mere mortals down there. Maybe if it had been a really huge-scale tax evasion issue, it would have been something. But by and large, everybody was willing to hand-wave away, okay, you forgot to pay some of the taxes you were supposed to. I'm not sure the IRS would be quite so easygoing with the rest of us. Here we see Geithner going to another lucrative financial industry job, which, oh, by the way, does something that looks, smells, and sounds an awful lot like predatory lending, which is what he had decided to do. And the fact that this doesn't, apparently doesn't seem to bother him, what his firm is doing now, what his firm is investing in, and, what's generating the profits that he's enjoying right now, I think just kind of indicates we could have a strong argument with the left about, should we abolish ICE, right? They're crazy lefties, but you almost have to admire the Bernie Sanders wing because they seem to really believe what they say. Their ideas, I suspect, are completely unworkable, utopian, and they haven't really thought through the details. And then sometimes in the case of, as we said in the last martini, they'll explicitly say, well, we'll figure out the details later. Well, the devil's in the details. But in the case of Tim Geithner, there's a suspicion that he doesn't actually believe much of what he says. That there's a question of, here's the message we're going to sell to the public, and then what we're actually going to do. Dodd-Frank, for example, we do. It's got to bring the end of the bailouts. By golly, these big fat cats on Wall Street. What you did was you imposed a whole bunch of regulations that made it very, very hard. Big banks can handle regulations. Big banks can hire teams of lawyers, and no matter how complicated the rules get, they can figure out a way to function under them. It's the smaller institutions, the smaller businesses, the smaller banks that had it. And I believe after Dodd-Frank, it was a really long stretch before anybody started a new bank in the United States. Well, you need new banks to get started. You don't get any new big companies unless you've got some mid-sized companies. You don't get any mid-sized companies until you get some small companies. And you don't get small companies unless you have these, little nascent startups, right? Usually just a handful of people, got a dollar in a dream, or hopefully a lot more than a dollar in a dream, but you've got some idea there. The Dodd-Frank was counterproductive in several important ways. My suspicion is most Democrats don't care about this. They're still this, those darn fat cats. They're all about the emotion, and they don't really want to think through the policy details. And that lack of attention to the policy details is what makes guys like Tim Geithner an exceptionally wealthy guy. Because he can completely flip on this, demonize an entire form of lending the entire time he's at the Treasury, and then once he's in the private sector, go right back to profiting off the exact same concept.
But he's indispensable, Jim, no matter where he is. Remember that he alone can solve the problem.
Was that him?
Yeah, don't you remember Barack Obama said he was uniquely qualified to deal with the issue, and so when the tax issues came up, that's why the Democrats ignored it, because Tim Geithner alone could lead us through the crisis.
There we go. Where would we be without him?
Yes.
I just remember Green Shoots, and wasn't it Recovery Summer? Which turned into Recovery Autumn, Recovery Winter, and we swear it's coming Recovery Spring?
Yeah, Recovery Winter lasted a long time, as I recall. Anyway, Jim, if you want to protect your finances, don't sign up with Tim Geithner's firm. If you want to protect your internet, you do want to go with ExpressVPN. And with all the recent news about data hacks and breaches, even at our highest levels of government not too long ago, it's hard for us not to worry about digital privacy. So no matter what you do online, your mobile carrier and your internet service provider, they track it all, every bit of it. Every website you visit, every email you send, it's ridiculous. So that's why you can take back your privacy using ExpressVPN. These days, you don't want to use the internet without it.
ExpressVPN is the world's leading VPN provider that lets you securely use the internet without being tracked by anyone. ExpressVPN keeps your online activity private and anonymous while you browse, email, download, or stream. And ExpressVPN is great for streaming content. You can even use it to watch the World Cup without a cable subscription. How cool is that? Their easy-to-use app encrypts all of your internet data and hides your IP address, protecting your entire connection. ExpressVPN costs less than $7 a month and runs seamlessly in the background of your computer, phone, or tablet. Every time you use the internet without ExpressVPN, you're putting your sensitive data at risk.
So why would you want to? Right now, you can take back your internet privacy. You can do it today. And you can find out also how you can get 3 months for free. Go to expressvpn.com/martini. That's expressvpn.com/martini for 3 months free with a 1-year package. Visit expressvpn.com/martini to learn more. Jim, of course, the other major story that keeps going on ever since Anthony Kennedy announced he wouldn't be back at the Supreme Court in the fall is the hysteria on the left about trying to stop Donald Trump from getting his choice on the court. Most of the Republicans are trying to figure out who from the list of 25 potential choices would make the best one. But the left, they're trying to throw out all sorts of hand grenades about how to stop this. So one, of course, was to suggest that he couldn't do it in a midterm election year because that would somehow violate the precedent set by Mitch McConnell in 2016. But it gets even better, and these are from actual law faculty members. Good job over at Hot Air for collecting these. First, you've got Ian Samuel. He teaches at Harvard Law. Tweet, if the Democratic Party wins the 2020 election, it will have won the most votes in 7 out of the 8 previous national elections. Adding 6 members to create a 15-member court, which would still have 5 GOP-appointed members, is actually incredibly generous to the Republicans. Then you've got Jed Sugarman, who teaches at Fordham Law. That seems to be a respectable school. He starts a thread by saying a president under investigation for impeachment has never appointed a justice, not Nixon, not Clinton, not Andrew Johnson, never. Democrats should make clear that if the GOP destroys this tradition, they will expand the court to 15 in 2021 without filibuster. Jim, it's amazing that, they just want to rip out the system when it doesn't go their way, whether it's the Electoral College, 9 Supreme Court justices, it doesn't matter. We want it to change, so we're just going to do it.
What's depressingly clear, the more you watch, you could argue all politics, or in particular judicial politics, is the sense that most people's core, fundamental, idealistic principle is, I should get what I want.
Right.
And they work backwards from there, right? If the filibuster would help me, then there should be a filibuster. If the filibuster would hurt me, there should not be a filibuster. If I would get 60-some votes for the guys I like, then the threshold should be 60-some votes. If I would not get that, then the threshold should be a bare majority. And what's kind of fascinating is that you see people in politics just kind of fundamentally incapable of dealing with 2 facts of life that are facts of life in our current era. They've been, I think, for at least a generation. I think you can argue going back several generations in American politics, that there's a pendulum effect, that you probably are riding high in politics at one particular term or one particular moment. But sooner or later, the public's going to get tired of you. They're going to get a sense that they're going to disappoint them in some way. There'll be some crisis you won't handle well, and you'll push too far in one direction, and the American public will push back in the other direction. Now, what's fascinating is every couple of years, whoever's on top convinces themselves, no, this time it's different. There's been a fundamental, I'm starting to sound like Newt Gingrich, a fundamental, profound transformation in American politics, and it's permanent change, and nothing is the same, and, there's now a permanent majority. And at least for the last, you can go back to at least FDR, you can make the argument, no, there really aren't any permanent majorities in American politics. That sooner or later you do that. So you may be riding high. You may have a majority in the House. You may have a majority in the Senate. You may have the White House. But you eventually you're going to be on the minority side. So whatever rules are in effect for when you're in charge, you'd better be comfortable living under them. And the Democrats just got, they're still rubbing their behinds because they're sore because of the realization of how badly they were hoist on their petard of destroying the filibuster for judicial nominations. And at this point, there's probably our 1 or 2 liberal listeners out there jumping up and screaming, Jim, it was only for non-Supreme Court judicial nominations. But once you've nuked it for one kind of judicial nomination, why would it be so impossible and unthinkable to do the same thing for a Supreme Court nomination? And you could go back to Miguel Estrada and the judicial fights under the George W. Bush administration. There's a lot of talk amongst the right, should Republicans get rid of the filibuster for legislation? There are mornings I'll be frustrated that I think what strikes me as fairly common sense legislation or ideas or something would really make things better can only get 57, 58, 59 votes in the U.S. Senate, and I'll be fuming, and I'll be like, we should get it. But the recognition is that someday there will be a Democratic Senate. Someday there'll probably be a Democratic House, maybe not too far away, depending on how the midterms go. And someday there's probably going to be a Democratic president. Maybe Trump serves 1 term, maybe Trump serves 2, but sooner or later, the other side is going to get control of government. It's just it's baked in the cake. It might be a long time away, might be a short time away, but once they have that, if you destroy the filibuster for legislation under you, well, then it's not going to be around for you when you're in the minority, which is one of the reasons Mitch McConnell does not want to get rid of it. Now, maybe that's wise, maybe it's not, but at least there's a recognition. It's really bonkers about this, and you see the Democrats say, we should court pack. Well, first of all, I think it was somebody was writing about this. Might have been Olive Pundit who said, all Mitch McConnell has to do to persuade Donald Trump to persuade court packing and put all 20-some of his awesome judicial nominations on the court is say, Mr. President, I think the Democrats don't believe you have the guts to do it. Oh, yeah? All right, let's do this. Ram them all through. Greg, this is a really bad time to be running around fantasizing about what you would do with total power, because right now the other side has total power. And oh, by the way, this is a president who isn't losing a lot of sleep about historical precedents. Probably the easiest way to get President Trump to do something is to say, oh, it's never been done before. Now, in the case of attempted court packing, it has been done before, but you just leave that out of your explanation to President Trump. I think 9 justices works. I'm not a big fan of making these sweeping changes. I don't like the idea of court packing on the right, and I don't like the idea of court packing on the left. But it's absolutely amazing to see Democrats continuing to refuse to believe that any procedural maneuver that they use could ever be used against them. And my suspicion is it's this continuing belief that they are the coalition of the ascendant, and the opposition is old, elderly, and going to die off, and someday we'll have total power. Eventually, the other side will simply fade away. There was that guy for Twitter who fantasized about how California was the future for American politics, with basically a one-party state. Look, pal, at least based on the last 70, 80 years, it has not shaken out that way. So we'll see how things go. The good news is I think this court packing idea is DOA.
Yeah, I would think so. I did look into it a little bit back when FDR was trying to do it. In addition to trying to get his policies approved, his plan was to add a justice every time somebody who was 70 years old and 6 months didn't leave the court before they got to that age. Jim, if we had that policy now, they'd need the fire marshal to change the capacity for the room.
If you're really frustrated with the court, the idea of term limits that gets tossed around, you need a constitutional amendment. Right? And oh, by the way, while we're at it, if we're going to do a constitutional amendment about who can be on the court, we probably should require a U.S. citizen, don't you think, Greg?
Yes, that would be good.
The DNC put out this, we need a justice who is an illegal immigrant. All of us are ready to scoff, but then you check the Constitution. Doesn't say that. It doesn't require that. So we could put in a few things like that. We could argue about whether the person needs judicial experience or whether the person needs legal experience or maybe an age limit or something like that. But maybe it makes sense to have an 18-year limit on Supreme Court justices. I don't think that would be a great damage to our democracy. I do think actually we're hurt by having these elderly justices and the recognition that we're all just one slip on an icy sidewalk away from a suddenly dramatically different Supreme Court. I think it turns into who can get their justices to live the longest as opposed to who can nominate the best judges. I mean, can you imagine the day, Greg, when somebody's like, well, he's a terrific justice, great potential nominee, fantastic record, crystal clear philosophy, great writer and persuader, brings knowledge and charm and persuasiveness to it. But I looked at his cholesterol HDL level. It just really has me worried. Can't put him on the court like that.
They probably are looking at stuff like that these days. Jim, good start to the week. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. And don't forget, right now, go take back your internet privacy at expressvpn.com/martini. And tune in again Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.